Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. Now, obviously the intention of this bill is to give legacy autos as big an advantage as possible, whilst benefiting Tesla as little as possible. We've seen their attempts time and time again. We've seen clauses such as unionized labour giving higher credits. Ironically enough, this also extended to Mexican labour in order to support American workers. Yes, it doesn't take a genius to read between the lines of the intention here. Legacy are trying to stay afloat until they are profitable with BEVs and potentially build a profitable business model, like paying subscriptions just for your heated seats. Of course, they probably actually think they may also be able to sell FSD subscriptions to their customers eventually. They may even think that LiDAR is the solution, and it might not even be because it's better, which it isn't. It might be because that's what Legacy's influence will have on the laws when it comes to FSD, thus rendering Tesla's FSD obsolete. Not what I think, just trying to get inside their heads to establish their intentions. Except Tesla have so much data that they will be able to demonstrate just how much safer Tesla FSD is than almost any human driver. Eventually, this will be data that can't be ignored, and my belief is that Tesla's FSD will eventually pass regulation as a result. Anyway, let's just go through this and try and establish how much of this is anti-Tesla and where will Tesla benefit or not benefit, and where are the main benefits for Legacy. In part of the bill, it stipulates that the minerals contained in the battery cells must be obtained from free trade agreement countries. In fact, it is actually just a percentage of them, starting at 40% and increasing 10% a year until they reach 80%. Of course, Legacy can never go to 100% as they'll still need to use cobalt from the Congo. Now, I'm not entirely certain where the majority of Tesla cells minerals are sourced, but I imagine the 4680 cells and 2170 cells might be acceptable. However, it may be harder to tell where CATLs are sourced. However, there's a strong chance that the iron is coming from Australia for the LFP cells, which is a free trade agreement country. So I'm not entirely sure why, if this is included. It may have been an attempt to block Tesla's LFP supply, but I guess we'll find out eventually. This then extends to battery components, and some percentage of the battery components must be manufactured or assembled in the US, which again might make it a bit harder for Tesla's standard range Model 3 LFP batteries. Of course, Tesla is not Legacy's only threat. In fact, they may even realize that Tesla is unstoppable by this stage, but other competitors are not. Perhaps it's game theory now. Which government can support their local auto industry the longest to make it through to the other side of a mass-produced EV battery that has low enough cost to produce a profit whilst delivering sufficient range? Therefore, it may even be the Chinese EVs that they very much want to keep out too. However, Tesla will have a ton of 2170 cells available soon when Berlin and Texas ramp up with 4680s, so they could just revert back to 2170 standard range Model 3s. I love Tesla's flexibility in business. This company is simply amazing. At least instead of the union requirement now, the bill stipulates that final assembly must be in North America. Just to point out, that is the entire continent of North America, not just the USA. In other words, Ford can still make their cars in Mexico. This will, however, make it harder for non-US legacy autos to take advantage of the credit, although many such as Toyota do already have manufacturing facilities in the US where they are able to achieve those economies of scale. I think it would be very difficult for a Chinese EV company to set up shop in the US in order to just take advantage of those tax credits. For one, they lose all their advantages of being in China, such as great manufacturing labour and low cost, fast construction along with their locally sourced LFP cells. BYD is probably the only one that could literally afford to do it, but I'm sure they're losing enough money with BEVs already as it is. Either way, it's definitely an advantage for US EV manufacturers. This would also mean that Tesla cannot import vehicles from China to sell in the US. And I do say EV manufacturers, not BEV manufacturers, because this is an EV bill, not a BEV bill. This is the worst part of the bill, the fact that the requirement is just a 7 kWh battery, which is about 1/10 the size Tesla use in their vehicles, or most other BEVs for that matter. If the size was above 30 kWh, then that would only include BEVs. But the fact we are this low, we have suddenly included hybrids. And I think I mean all hybrids, not just plug-in hybrids. If it is just plug-in, then let me know, but I couldn't find that stipulation anywhere. Anyway, a battery of that size might cost $1,000, then you have the motor and powertrain, so perhaps all up maybe looking at an additional $2,500 cost per vehicle when you include all the other costs and manufacturing involved. If it is a plug-in, then it might cost a little bit more as well. But with $7,500 extra credit, they can pass a lot of that cost onto the consumer. They also have to hope that the consumer still wants to buy hybrids, which they probably won't, but the waiting list and price of fully electric may not be feasible. People need a car of some sort. And this is what it comes down to, isn't it? A way for Legacy to survive a movement backed by the government and a massive advertising campaign to convince consumers that hybrid is the solution for now. The world is not ready for fully electric just yet. If the majority of legacy end up just making basic hybrids that don't even have plug-in charging, then it will not put as much force on the charging infrastructure either. If they all had to be plug-in hybrids, the drivers may want to go to malls with car parks where they at least get a free charge whilst they shop, thus encouraging more destinations to add chargers to keep their customers happy. Then the more chargers there are, the more consumers feel confident about purchasing an EV with the knowledge that chargers are becoming more ubiquitous. Just regular hybrids would not encourage additional chargers from the demand side economics. Could it also be that oil companies are even involved here somewhat and worried that if everyone had plug-in chargers that had a large enough battery for their daily commute, then they wouldn't need to stop at gas stations unless they were doing long-distance driving? Imagine if suddenly 30% of the US were driving plug-in hybrids with 50 miles of range. That would not be good for the gas stations. Now on with the anti-Tesla side. We're looking at how they're doing everything they can to suppress Tesla. Well, wouldn't you know, they've placed a price cap on vehicles in order to qualify. It's basically $55,000 for a sedan, and then a massive jump all the way to $80,000 for trucks, vans and SUVs. Fortunately, the Model Y does fall under that category along with Cybertruck, if the Cybertruck can offer a sub $80,000 version. But given this credit is supposedly to last for 10 years, then there very likely one day will be. But wouldn't you know, the Tesla Model 3 long range, well, that has just missed the threshold by $3,000. So close. But it's a massive jump to $25,000 increase in the threshold when you reach the larger vehicles though. The difference between a Model 3 and a Y is less than $10,000. So why such a big jump? Well, it's because they have oppressed the threshold. So the Model 3 long range doesn't qualify, and potentially the Model 3 standard too, depending on the sourced minerals. You see, Legacy don't make any fully electric sedans, and they could definitely make a hybrid sedan for well under $55,000. Well, there is the Chevrolet Bolt, but they start in the low 30s. Legacy are making electric trucks, SUVs and vans, as that is where the market is anyway, and they have this massive $80,000 limit, which even Legacy might be able to come under in order to qualify. Of course, Tesla can lower their prices to meet the cap, but then they'd have too much demand, as the car would have just reduced in price $10,500, which would likely double demand, and the waiting list would grow into a pain to manage for Tesla. In fact, it may even make sense to scrap the long-range and LFP version and come in with a mid-range version, which they actually used to sell. It was named the Lima. Tesla would then be able to get the Model 3 below the threshold. They would also have the manufacturing capability to make plenty of this model without the long range or standard range. It could probably reach 300 miles of range, which is sufficient, basically higher than any other EV out there. They could use all the excess 2170 cells that were being used for Berlin and Austin, once those factories are using 4680 cells. You see, with Tesla's outstanding efficiencies and margins and resources and economies of scale, etc., they can remold the company and products into whatever is necessary. Legacy can't compete with Tesla, they know that. But their advantage isn't technology, it's political power. So instead, they can cajole the industry to move into their benefit as much as possible. There is no slowing down Tesla. In fact, it's more a game of survival for Legacy now, and they realize that. They've taken their eyes off shooting Tesla down and instead doing what they can to prop themselves up before they sink, and many will sink. This EV credit doesn't even guarantee that for them, but it would appear it's their only hope, at least for now. If it doesn't work, then I expect taxpayers will end up bailing out the $100+ billion they're spending on cell and battery factories. That will then prop up their electric business. Do you get it? The foxes are guarding the hen houses. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.